Good day, everyone. My name is Gary Dickelman. I'm from EPSS Central LLC in the USA, and today I'm going to talk about reversing the paradigm, intensifying advanced material science domain expertise in this age of generative AI. Thank you for the opportunity to present my latest research on framing the human-AI synergy. The issue is especially relevant within scientific communities where we see astonishing outcomes when artificial intelligence is an integral part of research. We see AlphaFold from Google DeepMind, Genome, Microsoft's MatterGen, MatterSim, GNN models, A-Labs, MIT's DiffSyn, and so many more. In these narrow AI cases, some ability to validate outcomes is built in. The capacity is not completely autonomous, but their remarkable outcomes can be validated quickly, giving us a sense that it can be trusted without much human scrutiny. Generative models are different, and they are ubiquitous, even in research. And that difference is critical in almost all domains, especially in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Extracting the greatest value from generative AI requires mechanisms to mitigate our tendency to trust it without scrutiny, to expose its shortcomings, and to fashion its output to advance science. The first observation to consider is how both the university and the labor market are regarding generative AI. There's an underlying fallacy that says, as AI gets better, human domain expertise matters less. In education, it's the prevalent concern that students are using AI to cheat, and in the labor market, it's offloading tasks to AI and taking the human completely out of the loop, which means eliminating entry-level positions. The fallacy has organizations assume that humans are completely irrelevant at entry level. In reality, as AI assumes routine cognitive tasks, it simultaneously intensifies demand for higher-order domain expertise. I'm sure you see that in your own research. There are actually three fallacies at play and a force that feeds them. The cognitive offloading fallacy, which says that delegating cognitive work to external systems diminishes learning and competence. The second is the competence halo. Those spectacular achievements of narrow AI, like AlphaGo and AlphaFold, that suppress critical scrutiny around generative AI's limitations. We tacitly lump all such achievements into one thing we call AI, which gives us a sense that AI is almost omniscient and thus it can be trusted carte blanche. The third is the task equivalent assumption. If AI can perform tasks that humans would otherwise do, the human role is redundant and thus dispensable. There is one more companion to the confidence halo, and that's hype. We are bombarded with so much unqualified news and chatter in social media about how remarkable AI is and the inevitable coming of artificial general intelligence that it elevates AI's halo. It makes us believe that AI is so much smarter and more trustworthy than it is, which in turn expands the hype even further. Hype and halo feed one another. And here we are, sandwiched in the middle, unconsciously compelled to not check much of generative AI's output. These fallacies are, in part, derived from a tacit assumption that competence is demonstrated primarily from the solitary acts of individuals in isolation. Proof of that is how exams are administered. Any innovation that disrupts this perspective is seen as a threat to human competency when, in fact, it simply reorganizes it. It has been proven unequivocally that cognition is distributed and scaffolded. We use tools and other artifacts around us all the time to achieve outcomes. Consider these historical examples. In 3000 BCE, Plato feared that written text would weaken memory. Early versions of printing press in China and later the Gutenberg press in Europe created fears that scholars would become lazy and printed material would perpetuate misinformation. Then radio and television fostered fears that students wouldn't study because they would be glued to the device and hence become less intelligent. With computers and software in the scientific community, we saw CalFat, that is, calculation of phase diagrams, in the 1970s, that spawned fears that scientists would lose thermodynamic intuition, and finite element analysis, would create push-button engineers who really would not know what they are doing. Today, that role is occupied by artificial intelligence, generative AI, and we think that domain expertise is similarly obsolete. These fears are derived from the same fallacy. In reality, each time a tech innovation was framed as a threat to competency, it simply reorganized the competencies. I propose that we should not discourage AI's use, but to include it while bolstering the competencies to extract the most value from it. I propose a revision to competency development in the age of AI, to re-examine pedagogical frameworks like Bloom's taxonomy, and the way in which competency development is scaffolded. I propose a 3-zone performance taxonomy in which we encourage the use of generative AI while attending to the human competencies that are required to take full advantage of human-AI collaboration. Zone 1 is to allow basic competencies: routine calculations, writing code, basic experimental analysis, to migrate to AI. Encourage that. In reality, it fosters learning as a secondary outcome. More importantly, focus Zone 2 and Zone 3 competencies. Zone 2 is human elevated around problem framing, evaluation, regime boundary recognition, and contextual judgment. Those are specific attributes of critical thinking. Ultimately, Zone 2 elevates domain expertise versus the mechanism of calculating and coding. It acknowledges offloading routine tasks to AI while raising the ability to frame, design, evaluate, and iterate. Zone 3 comprises genuinely new competencies. It's about interrogating AI because you recognize where its limitations reside. Generative AI is not a knowledge base that generates truth. It's a confabulation system that produces outcomes stochastically based on high-dimensional linear models that manage token flow. Zone 3 competencies are what enable us to recognize insight from hallucination and distinguish truthful claims from implied ones. These are genuinely new competencies that are crucial in a world where the human-AI partnership has become commonplace and there's no turning back. Ask yourself this: do we not need to recognize when we are led to something wrong, potentially dangerous, and possess the competencies to correct it? In a recent blog based on this research, I coined the human error, generative sedation, as the intoxicating effects of halo and hype. It's when we stop at Zone 1 and ignore Zones 2 and 3. It's like waking up one night to a fire in your room. You see the extinguisher and realize there's a solution to the problem, so you go back to sleep. Last year in London, where I spoke at a similar conference, a materials science professor asked me how he might discourage his calculus students from cheating with AI. The exercise that follows is part of my response to him. It basically says this: you think they are cheating because you haven't changed the way you lecture, give homework, and evaluate students in the context of AI being inextricable from their studies. You're not going to stop students from using it. Instead, encourage it. But change those tired rubrics about how and when you lecture, the nature of the homework you assign, and how you evaluate competency. You are asking how to change them when the key question is, how should you change what you are doing? Cognition is distributed, and AI is now an inextricable artifact. So here's an example of a simple calculus problem framed to address all 3 competency zones. In the interest of time, and to not make you relive math anxiety, I'll just describe the assignment. Start by encouraging students to use AI to generate a solution. It's going to give you a single solution, either based on a double-angle formula or the obvious U substitution. It answers confidently, giving you one solution without the important nuance that there are 4 equivalent solutions that bear little resemblance to one another, nor does it explain why and how they can be equivalent. The 4-part assignment aims to tease out AI's shortcomings and bolster the student's deeper understanding of the underlying mathematics. Some may push back and say that Zone 2 and Zone 3 competencies are not appropriate for first-year students, maybe graduate students. But that is the reality of the human-AI partnership. We are compelled to raise the bar on early learning. You can apply the same pattern of that exercise in almost any domain, and we need to. Think of the regime boundaries in things as simple as motorcycle riding or health journalism. In the former case, AI will tell you to countersteer. that the physics of a motorcycle insists that you push on the left handlebar to turn left. Sounds counterintuitive, but that's how it works. Unless you are traveling under about 24 kilometers per hour or 15 miles per hour, there's an eigenvalue about which the physics of turning reverses. AI models don't tell you that. Ask about aspirin therapy to mitigate cardiac issues, and AI will tell you there's a 36% relative risk reduction with low-dose therapy and may casually mention bleeding risk. In reality, the percentage is 0.58% when you factor in age, morbidity, numbers needed to trust, and so forth. AI does not initially tell you that. AI might have the information, but it's not what it leads with. In response to a prompt, it tends to the dominant attractor in its linear and stochastic model. That's its nature. Let's look at a specific example in advanced material science. Many of you likely recognize this equation. I'll give you a few moments to answer this question. How do you maximize the yield strength of a polycrystalline metal? If you said reduce the grain size, you gave the same answer that AI would give, which is true, until it isn't. Below about 10 or 20 nanometers, there's an inversion that takes place, and that's the regime boundary. It weakens at that point. Dislocation pileup gives way to grain boundary sliding, and there's Coble creep, effects of temperature, and the like. Generative AI doesn't initially tell you that. AI tends to confabulate, applying the equation past its regime boundary. It has validity regime blindness, context integration failure, and objective function indeterminacy. Those are corrected by humans who possess Zone 2 and Zone 3 competencies. There are many other examples in advanced material science, and I'm sure you know them. Deformation mechanics, Ashley maps, ductile brittle transition and BCC metals, type 2 conductors, field regimes and the FFLL state, and quantum confinement crossover and semiconductor nanocrystals. I am a physical example of how this can happen. I have bilateral hip replacements from a controlled study of ceramic on ceramic implants. The manufacturer touted this as potentially lasting 30 years with negligible friction and being essentially inert. But the research neglected a regime boundary, and the manufacturer announced that they would not be marketing the product and that they would no longer be studying me. Minus the details, I am now at risk and require monitoring, special blood tests, and can expect complications if revisions become necessary. Thus, the regime boundary errors are true and require our attention. If you are applying AI in research, you require competencies to model, frame, discriminate, and interrogate the AI. It is not a truth-generating knowledge base that sometimes makes mistakes. It is a confabulation system that occasionally lands at truth. Please understand, I am unequivocally pro-AI. I am not defending human attributes in the age of the machine. I see enormous value in the human-AI partnership. But we have to deflate the halo, dispense with the hype, toss out the fallacies, and come to terms with the reality that demands greater human competency. Consider these 4 prevalent institutional practices. We see them in the lab and in workplaces devoted to advanced material science. They are uncertainty qualification, hybrid architectures, provenance tracking, red teaming protocols. Why have they become so prevalent? It's not that they are unique to where AI is applied, but there's much more emphasis on them now. I would argue that organizations are tacitly recognizing the importance of Zone 2 and Zone 3 competencies and manifesting such recognition in these protocols. But aren't they perhaps being applied a little late in the scientific process? Why don't we start at the onset of the entire learning and performance experience? As I said, the 3-zone taxonomy for designing learning and doing exercises and evaluating performance reflect a more realistic, distributed view of cognition and how to develop critical competencies in the human-AI partnership. Bear in mind that the 2 AI failure modes appear everywhere: completeness suppression and context integration failure. The Hall-Peck equation and the several other examples apply equations past regime boundaries. To be sure, I'm not saying the details are not in the models, but it's dominant attractor that appears initially in response to a prompt. Therein lies the danger. It is the same mechanism that produces facts, leaves things out, and gives misinformation and hallucination at the time of generation, with no indication of which is which. You need learners and performers to possess the competency to identify these patterns, and Zone 2 and Zone 3 competencies are where that competence lies. Those who cannot or will not scrutinize AI output put advanced material science at risk. The human error that reflects this behavior is called generative sedation. The image here provides a visual representation of generative AI's behavior. It derives from the forerunner to chaos theory, which is catastrophe theory. Siemens' work puts this into perspective. Nature is notoriously nonlinear, which gives rise to chaos. We expect that a set of control variables will result in an unambiguous state, but that's not the case. Put simply, ambiguity results in bifurcations. Small perturbations in the control space often result in catastrophic differences in the state space, as illustrated here. Now, more to the AI point, when you try to model physical reality with multidimensional linear operators, non-linear reality bites back. We encounter bifurcations from prompt ambiguity and instability. What the generative model does in response is telling. It migrates the outcome state to the dominant attractor. Unfortunately, that result might be incomplete, incorrect, out of context, or as we've seen, a misapplication of a trusted equation beyond its regime boundary. We apply all sorts of tricks and miracles to AI models to mitigate questionable behavior, like gradient descent, KNN, K nearest neighbor, Bayesian statistics, and more. But we never seem to completely rid the models of this pathology. Linear modeling of a stubbornly nonlinear world sometimes results in chaos. The competence halo keeps suggesting that this doesn't happen. It makes us think that generative AI is a truth-generating knowledge system when it in fact is a plausibility-generating system that sometimes gives fluency, which is output that resembles truth. Both plausibility and hallucination derive from the same mechanism. The corrective measures lie outside the AI system. This is even the case with narrow AI. Consider AlphaGo and the famous move 37. Every expert dismissed the move as an error, but only after extensive analysis did the Go community and its masters recognize it as brilliant and adopted it. AI generated the mood, but human judgment determined its value. With AlphaFold, we often hear that, quote, AI solved the protein folding problem. Well, not quite. AlphaFold generated the predictions. Scientists determine whether those predictions correspond to physical reality. Surely AlphaFold compressed discovery time by orders of magnitude, but don't fall victim to the competency halo. AI generates possibilities. Human beings determine the truth. There are at least 5 additional reasons why Zone 2 and Zone 3 competencies are not optional. The first is model collapse, where AI systems evolve on their own exhaust. For example, most websites today are generated by AI. Machine learning scavenges that content to advance large language models. This self-referencing causes critical capabilities of the model to collapse. It results in a structural vulnerability, where the model is trained recursively on its own outputs, which results in progressive loss of lexical, syntactic, and semantic diversity, with the earliest and most severe degradation occurring in the distributional tails that contain rare, anomalous, and novel data. These tails are precisely where innovation and signal generation originate. The second is called the creativity ceiling. Cognitive and neuroscientists who explore human creativity understand that there are different types. Exploratory and combinatorial creativity are largely shared by AI systems, but transformational creativity is uniquely human in almost all cases. That is where two completely disparate things that would never be joined stochastically are combined to produce remarkable results. Like the thought of riding a light beam that reflects off a clock, resulting in the time dilation component of special relativity. In advanced material science, Think of C60, which is the Buckminster fullerene discovered by Harold Kroto, Robert Curl, and Richard Smalley. Fuller was an architect and designer who had no presence in carbon spectroscopy, and the carbon cluster community had no reason to consult microscale civil structures. The two would not have been joined stochastically. Yet the topology that let Fuller span large spaces with minimum material is precisely the topology that lets 60 carbons close on themselves with uniform bond strain. The transformative consequence is well known. The entire fullerene field, then carbon nanotubes, then a reframing of what carbon allotropes could exist, with graphene eventually following as a limiting case. Nobel Prize in Chemistry, 1996. Human beings do that. Generative AI, not so much. And a good reason is because of model collapse. Next, there's hype, financial incentives, and epistemic caution. Regulatory bodies have begun responding to this misalignment, where the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has initiated enforcement action related to AI washing in response to widespread use of vague or unsubstantiated AI claims, arguably advocating for Zone 2 and Zone 3 competencies when making investment decisions. Evaluating AI claims with methodological rigor, specifically distinguishing demonstrated performance from projected capability and marketing narratives from empirical evidence, is itself a critical Zone 2 competency. Teaching this evaluative capacity is therefore foundational, not peripheral, to AI-era education and professional development. Then there's the coevolution and the coupled system argument. Historical evidence consistently shows that human cognition does not remain static as tool environments evolve. Technologies functioned as cognitive scaffolds that expanded rather than diminished human capability. Generative AI fits this pattern where human cognition and AI capability form a coupled system in which each shapes the demands placed on the other. Models that treat AI development as a substitution process rather than a coevolutionary one misunderstand the dynamics of cognitive change. Under a distributed cognition framework, Zone 2 and Zone 3 competencies are the mechanisms through which this coupling remains productive. I would therefore amend the singularity or inflection point argument with one that suggests asymptotic conversions, not one replacing the other. Finally, a common objection to the necessity of sustained human cognitive development compares the slow pace of biological evolution with the rapid advancement of machine learning systems. While the observed rate differential is real, the inference that AI systems are therefore on a trajectory to subsume human cognition rests on a category error. Biological evolution produces general-purpose adaptive systems through blind optimization, while machine learning advances rapidly because it is directed towards specific human-defined objectives and benchmarks. The processes do not explore the same capability space at all. Speed of improvement alone does not imply functional equivalence. The evolutionary timescale argument is not evidence against the thesis of my paper, but is evidence for it. The extraordinary rate of machine cognitive development is itself a product of human Zone 2 and Zone 3 competencies, which include problem framing, architectural judgment, critical evaluation, and transformational creativity of the researchers who build and continue to direct machine cognition. Eliminating those competencies in education or in the workforce would not accelerate the trajectory, it would undermine the most essential input. Those 5 things represent compelling arguments for why Zone 2 and Zone 3 competencies are not optional. We can offload certain things to AI, but we have to be vigilant. We can't fall victim to generative sedation. Here's the model of how things have changed. Traditionally, the human being is at the center, doing the calculations, the implementation, the testing, creating the documentation. All those things surrounding the human being in this image. Task know-how is the dominant attribute, with modest needs for articulation, output evaluation, and strategic judgment. Those latter things have typically been offloaded substantially to subject matter experts. But your ability to articulate, design, and evaluate output, even though you don't know how to create the thing, you know what it is supposed to do, and you can evaluate and iterate. In that sense, the AI is pretty competent to respond to you. But the human being is very much on the outside of this, doing the design, the articulation, the evaluation, and applying the scrutiny. Those sub-competencies are very different in the pre and post AI world. In conclusion, there are many steps for educators, for practitioners, and for organizations. For educators, turn your paradigm on its head. Change the way you lecture, the way you assign homework, and the way you evaluate. All of those things have to be based on those three-zone competencies where you encourage AI use and you don't consider it cheating if your evaluation criteria looks at your students' critical thinking, understanding how the model works, and being able to interrogate it to distinguish hallucination from truth. For practitioners, building the regime boundary awareness into your workflows and into your lab. Test AI outputs against the mechanistic understanding. Demand that provenance. And for organizations, preserve the entry-level pipeline. Senior talent you need in 5 years needs to develop now. There is currently a critical shortage of senior talent resulting from the choked entry-level pipeline. The economics of such substantial offloading to AI is profoundly short-sighted. Note that there is an appendix to this presentation that I won't go over here, but it is a detailed 4-section 3-zone exercise based on Hall Pets. It includes assessment criteria. Happy to share the deck with anyone. Send me an email, gdickelman@icloud.com. I'll close with a short anecdote. In my original abstract for the research paper, I included a statement that said some elements of science fiction informed this thesis. I removed it so not to annoy the peer reviewers, but I can say it here. I'm going to hearken you back to the movie Jurassic Park.
John, the kind of control you're attempting is, it's not possible. Listen, if there's one thing the history of evolution has taught us, it's that life will not be contained. Life breaks free, it expands to new territories, and it crashes through barriers painfully, maybe even dangerously, but, well, there it is.
You're implying that a group composed entirely of female animals will breed?
No, I'm simply saying that life, finds a way.
You know, nonlinearity, chaos, all that. How remarkably prescient, but not surprising, as author Michael Crichton was a scientist. Malcolm called out fluency dressed up as truth, implications veiled as conclusions. It was as if Halo and Hype walked into a bar and met Lazy and Gullible. What walked out is something more intoxicated than if it had consumed several espresso martinis. Thank you for listening.